All right. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome my special guest today, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Chuck Hayes. All right. Feel free to introduce yourself for the audience that doesn't know you.
Hey, everybody, and thanks a lot, George, for having me on today. As George said, I'm Chuck Hayes. I am a retired Navy SEAL. I retired at the rank of captain in the Navy, which is on the officer side. But before that, I spent a total of 40 years in service, 15 of which I was an enlisted Navy SEAL, and 25 of those was as an officer. So that was enabled me to get a good smearing of everything that's going on in the SEAL teams. And I started in the SEAL teams around 1983, and I retired just a couple of years ago. And so I'm happy to be here with you today and happy to answer the questions that I can.
Sounds good, man. I mean, we spoke over the phone a lot and we spoke about how extensive your career was. So, just talk about that, because that's impressive in and of itself.
Okay. I'll start it off at the beginning. So I'm originally from Alabama, a little town called Tallahassee, which is right outside of Montgomery, about 25 miles. And I'd never been outside of the surrounding states of Alabama in my upbringing. And 100% honest with you, I didn't really know what a Navy SEAL was. I knew what a frogman was because I saw them climb on the recovery capsules, back when we were sending rockets to the moon. And I remember asking my dad, what are those? And he said that those are frogmen. And I learned a little bit about that. But I did not do very well in high school. So my dad said, you know what, you might want to look at joining the military until you can get serious a bit. And so college was not in the cards for me. And so what he did is my mom and my dad, they had me listen to all four recruiters. And when I listened to the Navy recruiter, they handed me a book and they said, you're qualified for just about every job that we've got in the Navy. Why don't you look through this book? And on the very last page, they had a Navy SEAL. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. And the recruiter said, well, you can't do that. And I was like, well, why can't I do it? You told me that I could do just about every job. And he said, well, that job you got to volunteer for once you actually join the Navy. And so you pick these jobs and we'll line you up for that. And then once you get in the Navy, you can volunteer for that. And strangely enough, that it was 100% true. And it was really that easy. It was join the Navy, and I joined the Navy as what was called an undesignated striker, which really means I didn't have a job because I guess in some ways you could say I was confident enough in myself that I was going to become a Navy SEAL. In other ways, you could say that I was just dumb enough to do that. But fortunately, it worked out for me. And when I got to boot camp, I did a really good job in boot camp, and they let me go and, for a lack of better words, audition for the Navy SEALs and go through their screening test that they have. And it was really as simple as if you pass the medical part, with your vision has to be pretty good in your hearing and everything else. And then, of course, physically, you needed to be in good shape. Just doing that. And then they put you in what was called the SEAL pipeline, and which meant that they were pulling you they would either allow you to go through your Navy school or they would pull you out and send you forward to SEAL training. And so I left one boot camp in Orlando, Florida, to go to another boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, which I served as a lifeguard for a period of time, like 3 or 4 months, with other folks like myself that were either going to become Navy divers, Navy SEALs, or Navy EOD. We just acted as lifeguards there because we were all very proficient swimmers. And waited for our class to class up. And then mine classed up 4 or 5 months later and went out to Coronado, California, and started SEAL training in class 124 with my good buddy, Steve Giblin, which you have interviewed before. And as for the audience there, I was telling George that Steve Giblin and I not only were in the same SEALs Bud class, we were in the same SEALs boat crew. So we went through Hell Week approximately 3 feet from one another together through that entire process. And he's a good friend, and he had a very distinguished career in and of itself. I'm sure that of your listeners that have listened to the interview that you've had with him. And so did SEAL training. And then Steve and I both ended up going to SEAL delivery vehicle team. And I broke my foot, got a stress fracture in second phase, and got rolled back to class 125. And second phase then is the diving phase. And I went through that phase. And so Steve graduated, I want to say it's a couple of months, probably 2 months before I did. And then I forgot what he did. I think he went to jump training. And immediately after I got through with SEAL training, he and I and several other friends of ours, all destined for SDV Team 1 or SDV Team 2, SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, which was on the West Coast at that point in time in Coronado, and then SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2, which is in Little Creek, Virginia, in the Norfolk area. So we went through another 3-month training there where we learned how to drive the small submersibles. And that's very challenging because you're navigating underwater, which means you need to get from one place to another. And the water's kind of cold out there in California, even though it looks sunny all the time. And so that was kind of challenging. And then once I completed that, I went to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2. And we did what was called, you get in a platoon there. And that platoon was outfitted with 2 of the SEAL delivery vehicles. And then you would do what we called a workup and advanced operator training, which allowed you to become more proficient in driving those little submarines. And we did that for a number of years. And I'm just throwing Steve in there with me because our careers were kind of paralleling at that point. And then from that point, there was another SEAL team that was a very specialized SEAL team that some of you guys are probably familiar with, that really all of us wanted to go to. Probably all young aspiring SEALs wanted to go to this place because it was the very pinnacle of the SEAL teams. So after my first deployment, I applied for that place and I was accepted. And Steve had gone probably 6 months, Steve had gone the year before me. And so I came after that and then went to that command and had a great career there. I forget, I know I'm on Steve a lot here, but that's only because our careers were paralleling so much. I forgot how long Steve stayed there. I know I stayed there as an enlisted guy for 10 years. And in those 10 years, what you do is become an extremely proficient SEAL, and you go through you go through more additional training there. And the missions do you want me to just roll into those, George? Do you want me to just keep?
Yeah.
Kind of on now. You know, if you want me to keep rolling, and if you want me,
absolutely.
If you want me to clarify anything along the way, feel free to just step in. But during the time that I was there, I went to the invasion of Panama, which was back in 1989. And I don't know if any of you guys can remember that. But what that was is they had a dictator down in Panama. His name was Manuel Noriega. And so anyway, he had fallen from the good graces of the U.S. government. And an invasion was launched to go down and dismantle his military. And I was a part of that. And that was my first taste of a combat mission. And then from there, I went and I became at this command. When I was there, you know, as a SEAL, you have all different types of specialties. And as I've just said before, that one of the specialties that both Steve and I both had was the ability to drive the small submersibles. Well, once at this new place, this new SEAL team that I was at, one of the things that they were very short on for that time were combat medics or combat SEAL medics, or as we call them in the Navy, corpsmen. And that means that you're trained in medicine and you have the ability to take care of people if they get wounded or hurt. And my team was very much hurting for one of those. And so I volunteered. So I went back to Great Lakes, Illinois to Navy Corpsman School, where I learned to be a corpsman, and then got what we call the Navy rate, which is a job source as a Navy corpsman. So I was a Navy Corpsman SEAL. And then from that one, I'm sure a lot of you and your viewers, a lot of you are familiar with the Green Beret, the Army Special Forces. Once I got back to the command, I was sent immediately to go through the Green Beret medic training, which is called 18 Delta, and it's called we just call it the 18 Delta Long Course. And at that moment in time, I went to Fort Sam Houston, Texas for 7 or 8 months, and where I learned a lot of medicine and a lot of trauma. I came back to the command, and at that command, that was in that time and moment when I went to the invasion of Panama. Came back from that, and then we went to Fort Bragg, which is now Fort Liberty. And at Fort Bragg, back in the day, they have what's called Special Forces Goat Lab. And I went through the Goat Lab, which is the specialized portion of the Special Forces medic training, where we work on real live animals, which replicate the human body, which enables us to better be able to be great medics. And you absolutely become that at that place. And during my time with the Green Berets and going through the Green Beret selection, I had many friendships that endured as I did during SEAL training and during my SEAL career. And I'll also give my hats off to the Green Beret training that the attrition rate of the 18 Delta course was greater than my SEAL training. I believe we started with 80 something folks, and at the end of the first phase, we were down to about 17. And then they combined two classes with about the same amount. And we only lost a few more after that. But the quality of medic that comes out of that, some say that it's equivalent to a third-year medical student. I do know that with regard to combat trauma, I've always been very comfortable with any accident that I've ever been around in my ability to provide medical assistance to that, whether that be a training situation or in combat or in any other point in time. So anyway, I finished that one up, and I'll breathe for a second. Do you got any questions for me right now at this stage of the game?
Actually, a little bit. So
Sure.
you're mentioning about the invasion of Panama,
Mm-hmm.
by the U.S. government. So when that happened, because I wasn't aware of this is a historical event, but it did remind me of somebody that I wanted to have on the show. And I'm not gonna say his name, but he was talking a little bit about Red Cell. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that team, but it was a team that used to exist by the Navy SEALs that would effectively invade it was the U.S. government effectively invading itself to test on whether or not their own security measures worked, and they did everything from hijack I'm using air quotes because it wasn't real, but Air Force One, get in the White House, stuff like that. Were you ever familiar with any of them?
I was. Several of them were my teammates. And though I was not a member of that unit myself, I am familiar with them, with the mission that they had. And it was really more than, I think, where it really got its bread and butter was it tested the security of naval installations. And also, and with that, because if you think about it, if you've got a Navy installation that has nuclear submarines or nuclear carriers there, you would want to probably test yourself to make sure that all the security measures that you have in place are effective. And, so U.S. property remains U.S. property in the big scheme of things. But, yeah, there's some interesting books about that unit that was out there. And they were either admired a lot or not admired a lot. And I can understand that, because I can understand if I was the commanding officer of some Navy base and I had guys sneaking in through sewer pipes and taking over one of my nuclear submarines, that would quite cause me some concern. But as we found out as I've found out through all of my time in the Navy SEAL teams, it's all about that quality training, and realistic exercises and realistic training, which shows us our vulnerabilities. And when you learn those vulnerabilities, then you're able to fix those things and actually become better for it. So I can understand both sides of the hat with regard to that unit, and how in some ways it was despised and in some ways it was loved.
Well, I think that comes down to people just not accepting criticism, really. Because
Yep.
some people, because a lot of people, if it was up to me, right? If I was like the head of security for a nuclear submarine, like you're saying, and next thing I know, somebody successfully infiltrates my base and proves how incompetent I am, or like so many things I'm doing wrong, right? I would feel a little embarrassed, right? Especially with such a high job, probably leads to a lot of people getting fired, stuff like that. So, it's more understandable on their side, but ultimately I feel like it was a good thing.
Yeah, and you're wise beyond your years, my friend, because you're 100% right on every one of those points that you just made. 100%.
I appreciate that. Well, so when you met some of these guys, like what separated people that went to like Red Cell? Because I've always been kind of interested in that group. Like, I mean, I'm not saying like I know you weren't part of it specifically, but from what I've heard about it, it just seems like this really fascinating idea that you know and there was actually a very big scandal with it where the group Red Cell, I'm not sure if you're aware, they apparently did torture a security guard for like 3 days on end, and that ultimately led to the group getting disbanded, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but what are your thoughts on, I guess, ultimately the separation of the group?
Yeah, I wasn't specifically too aware of that, and like I said, I do have uh, several teammates that were a part of that unit. You know, I don't with regard to that in that specific event, if it in fact occurred, you just have to be as a leader of any organization. You just have to be able to have the trust in your folks and the ground truth to understand what's going on and to step in. And for lack of better words, be brave and step in when you see things that are going sideways that, if in fact they are, and to understand them. And as you get further up the food chain, that gets harder to see all the way down through those layers, if you're the head person in charge. But there's one thing that we found out in the SEAL team, and that's leadership at all levels. So everybody has the ability and absolutely should exercise good, solid leadership and being a good follower, being a good leader, and watching out for situations that could, they're not really what the mission is. B, could damage the credibility of the organization. And probably the most important one, which I don't know why I made it the third one, is just fundamentally not right. And I think down deep in everybody's core, we all have a moral compass, and that moral, we were of what's right and what's wrong. And when somebody starts stepping outside of those boundaries and stuff, I know in the SEAL teams, they've had it done to me a million times. They just corral you up when you start getting a little bit left or right of center, or you start losing track of what right looks like. One of your buddies go, "Hey man, we can't do that. What are you doing?" And it's like, "Roger that, got it." And all those little course corrections, they're really important.
Good leadership is 100% a point that many other members of government personnel that I've had on here have spoken about. I even had former head of the New Jersey FBI on here, right? He's talking about, and even former deputy assistant director of the ATF, and they both were saying about how leadership is extremely important, no matter the agency or the organization. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of it, nowadays, where people like you're saying step in and just say, "Hey, don't do that. That's wrong." And actually that would lead me into another question, which is, what would you like to see change potentially in either the Navy SEAL program or the military as a whole?
You know, I there's one thing that we take pride on it in the Navy SEAL teams, and as all the way down to the individual frogman, and that's, we love to say that training was a lot harder when we went through than what it is right now. We always say that. It's like, if training wasn't so easy, well, I'm going to tell you something. Training's probably a lot harder right now than it's ever been. And the quality of training that everybody gets. So I can't say anything about SEAL training because it's hard. And it's like, whenever I go out to California or whatever, I'll listen to people talk. I'll watch the young aspiring tadpoles running up and down the beach. That's what we call, little frogmen that aren't frogmen yet, the little tadpoles. We watch them run up and down the beach. And, in a lot of ways I sit out there and look at that. And so I really can't, I can't point a finger at that. One thing that I will point a finger at, and this is not something that needs to be corrected, but it's something that needs to continue, is high quality, realistic training. Because as when we were talking about with the Red Cell, and the way that they used to go on and infiltrate Navy installations to prove shortfalls in security, the SEAL teams absolutely need to and will continue to train extremely realistically, because as the battlefield evolves, so does the enemy, and the things that they bring to they bring to the battlefield, whether it be drones or electronics or abilities to conduct electronic surveillance. And in addition to being able to the basics and fundamentals of being a warrior soldier anywhere, which is shoot, move, and communicate, you have to be able to do all of those things. And that's not something that you can become better at on Fortnite or Call of Duty. You have to go and get out in the woods, move a lot in the woods or in the desert or in the water or wherever it is. And it's not any fun, and it's hard, and it's tough, and those nights are cold. And if it's not raining, you're not training. That's one of the old Marine Corps things, and it's so true. It's got to be tough. I guess somewhere in the back of, I just remember this in the back of my mind, one of our old SEAL instructors, Henry Delacruz, and he would say, "Here's the deal, young tadpoles." He goes, "If the enemy fortress has that outpost, that's out, that guardhouse out on the outside of an enemy outpost, and it's on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea," he goes, "you want the rainiest, most terrible, most freezing night for you to come scaling up the backside of that mountain and taking out that guard post, because you know where that guard's going to be. He's not going to be standing out there with his binoculars looking out to sea. He's going to be huddled nice and warm inside by his thing." So, you've got to be trained to be able to endure those elements, endure those hardships, so you can come and get them when they least expect it. Because that's the name of the game. And that's kind of what the Navy SEAL teams, not excluding other entities of, the Department of Defense out there, but that's one thing that we've always prided ourselves on, is being sneaky and coming in the worst place at the worst time when nobody else would ever expect you. So I guess to answer that question is to continue the realistic training. For the entire military itself is, I would absolutely, the thing that I would push the most there is the interoperability between all of the services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard, everybody working together to each other's strengths. Because when we combine each other's strengths, that's when we're going to be the most powerful and most strong, and couple that with realistic training. The realistic training is so very important. And as you know, the United States Department of Defense, we project power globally all over the world. And some say that we're America's policemen, and in a very large sense we are. So it doesn't matter the geographic terrain of the entire world. The entire world is what we have to be good at. So that interoperability and realistic training. Thanks for that question, though, George. That one really had me. It makes you dig back into the memory banks and really think about what's important. When you distill down all of the different elements.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I've asked that to, I think, like one or two others, two other Navy SEALs that I've had on the show, and they talked a little bit about how mental health. Interestingly enough, they had the same answer. I think both Will Branham and Jordan, when I brought them on, and they were talking about how, unfortunately, the numbers for veterans and suicides and PTSD is 1 in 22. That's about the statistic. And they were talking about how, like, that just shouldn't be the case. And if it was up to them, they would have, just either, more people looking out for each other, or just have some type of change where, we see that number drop to 0 to 22. Right. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or how
I
we
do.
can? Yeah.
I really do, George. I thought about that a lot, and for myself, I knew that I've been exposed to a lot of different things, along the way, and by no means did I think I was, any exception there whatsoever. And having lots of friends, that sadly have committed suicide, and then again, we've also and had a lot of folks that lost along the way, and then probably, and then also too, just people that suffer, from the different aspects of it. Because, being a member of the Department of Defense, and even a little bit further down, a member of the core of what we call combat arms, the folks and people that actually have to go, face to face with the enemy, that does leave scars, and those scars are invisible. And I think that the military is coming a good ways, certainly much further than we have before, with a lot further to go, with understanding and trying to understand the mental component and how it plays, and then how to train. If I'm probably not using the right word, and you'll excuse the fact that I've been out of the military for like a year or two now, so I'm probably not using the right little term. But like we train to shoot, and we train to move, and we train to communicate, and all of that other stuff. And also ways to learn to be mentally more resilient to everything that you've had coming through. And as you said, that you were talking about what some of the other fellows had said, and Will had said, was those different those different tool sets that you can use to help that, and a part of that is just understanding what it is that you're dealing with. And when I was a commanding officer, I had one of my sailors commit suicide, and it was just horribly traumatic for everybody in the command. um and then you then their parents become, essentially part of the command, and helping them through such an incredibly tough time. And I stutter in my words when I talk about it, just because it is just so highly traumatic. And I'm 100% behind everything that can possibly be done to allow people to understand what their job is and what their responsibilities are within the Department of Defense. You know what I mean? And sometimes the selection of the job, like to be a member of combat arms, um, though everybody's job is very important, with it comes the additional burden of being very close to, sometimes, combat death and things like that. And that's not to exclude death occurs in training. Death occurs quite often in the military, because it's a dangerous occupation, whether that be walking around on a flight deck, flying in a plane, a jet, working underwater as a Navy diver or some other type of diver. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. That it's a tough job, and those things can absolutely happen. And I'm 100% behind everything that can be done to better prepare soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen mentally, better to understand, to be able to cope with these things. And if you're unable to cope with them, where there is help, and to be able to reach out and find that help quickly.
It's absolutely a very scary thing too, especially with, when I was talking to Julian Dory. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. But I did an interview with him, and he interviews a lot of former military personnel, Navy SEALs and such. And he even says that at night he worries, like, with a lot of his friends that have been in the military, where he's like, is their head in a good space? Is their mind, like at night he worries about his friends, and it's something he shouldn't have to do. you know he didn't go into the military himself, and like he's worrying about his friends that have gone in, and hoping that their mind is in a good spot. And it's unfortunate, to say the least. In my opinion, I think that it's with anything, we kind of need to learn to sometimes talk ourselves down a little bit, calm down. Like, we need to teach people how to do that. It's the same thing with police training. I heard a statistic where it's, you know, police only get a handful of hours of learning how to de-escalate a situation, but thousands and thousands of hours of how to, properly deal with, shooting and such, right? Like if you're in a situation. But, I personally think that, we should have significantly more time focused on de-escalation and thinking things through and coping with how you feel and learning how to do that, you know. And that actually does lead me to the next question, which is, what's a philosophy and or a mindset that you'll never understand?
Oh, when you for your audience, George, I'll go ahead and spill the beans a little bit there. That George did pass me the questions a couple of hours before we were actually going to do this interview, and that one really gave me pause. It really did. I gave a lot of thought to that. Um, Sadly, I don't think that I'm going to be able to jar the world with my response, though I'd love to be able to. But here's something that I really got to thinking about on that was a concept that I was fortunate to serve in Pakistan, working at the embassy for a little while during Operation Enduring Freedom, which, for most folks, that was the war in Afghanistan. And during my time there, Ambassador Ann Patterson was the ambassador there, and she's an extraordinary human being that has given her entire career in foreign service for the United States of America, culminating in being an ambassador, excuse me, in multiple countries, and often the most difficult situations around. So when I was there, I didn't have any personal conversations with Ambassador Patterson, but I always listened to everything that she had to say. Ambassador Patterson and Ambassador Ryan Crocker, both of those individuals served in Pakistan, and I respect them both immensely. Just the diversity of their careers and also the complexity of their careers. But anyway, Ambassador Patterson, she was talking about it one day, and she said the problem is, and for all of these situations, and she was talking predominantly about the global war on terrorism, is the concept of angry young men. And it really gave me pause. And I got to thinking about that. And, I should write a book on that or do a doctorate dissertation on the concept of angry young men. But just in me saying that, I think you know where I'm coming from. It's young men that don't have purpose, and then they listen to people that may be trying to manipulate them and take them down a path that is not a good path, which ultimately ends up. And unfortunately, there's always a healthy supply of angry young men that comes in. And I think that if I was truthful and honest with myself, I could say that I was an angry young man when I was 18 years old, and I joined the United States military and became a Navy SEAL so I could be the best fighter on earth, and I will gather around all of that and say I did that with great patriotism, and I would not do anything any differently. And along the way, I was able to learn what a not angry man is supposed to be, and the way that you organize yourself, and the way that you see the world, and the way that you show compassion and care for others, in addition to being a deadly warrior, if you will. And I will say too that, specifically for me, I saw it all over the world in a variety of different areas, in Panama and El Salvador and Haiti and Bosnia and Afghanistan and Yemen and Pakistan and Africa and the Indo-Pacific and in South Korea and all the other places that I went. As you work with other members of special operations forces all over the world, it doesn't matter if you can't speak each other's language. It's like you find that you're all kind of the same, and it's like you're trying to do the best you can for your country in that capacity, and you believe what you're doing is right. And I guess the bad guys, whoever I would consider bad guys, whether that be Al Qaeda or the Taliban, I think they think that what they're doing is right too. Which it's a mindset that I was absolutely a part of that I don't understand, but I'm trying to understand it. And as I get older, I understand it a little bit more. And I don't know if you probably haven't had the chance to experience it yet, George, but when I reflect back, I'm almost 60 years old this year after 40 years in the military. And I reflect back over my career and times like these when I'm talking to guys like yourself and remembering these other times, I almost see myself as different people in these like little decades of my life, if you will. You know, I'm still the same person, but the things that were important to me at one point in my life are not necessarily that important to me at all. But I'm getting highly philosophical with you now, and I appreciate your question, but I hope that was helpful to a degree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of talking points right there with a lot of the things you said. Number one, with, you know, when you're saying that throughout your lifetime, you've generally been the same person, but, what's important to you has changed. I think that's just the nature of time, you know, like for everybody, everybody's priorities change over time, right? Like, what's important to me right now is either not going to be important to me or not as important to me in the next 10 years. Who knows? For some people, when they're really young, money is important. Other times, it's when they're 60, money becomes important, right? Other times, when they're 20, they want to have kids, right? Everybody's different, but that's a conversation I've had with Steven, Will, and Jordan. It's about purpose a lot of times. It's a very important conversation people need to have. And to your point about angry young men, I've had the lead researcher of school shootings in the United States on, right, the show. And I that was a really interesting conversation between me and him because it proved a lot of things to be untrue that I thought were true. But one of the points that he talked about was with Nicholas Cruz, the man who shot up Parkland, right? The school. And he talked to me about how Nicholas in one of the police interviews said that, he felt like he was nobody, and then with a gun and the ability to walk into a school that he all of a sudden could become a somebody, right? And he just talked endlessly about this hate that he had for different people. And if you look at his life, his mother smoked crack while she was pregnant with him. And on top of that, I don't believe his father was anywhere in his life either. That's a man without purpose that, unfortunately, and a very angry young man, I would say, extremely angry with either himself, the world, people, I don't know. But ultimately, it ended up with 19 dead children. And that is a tragedy to say the least. But that's an extremely important topic of discussion is angry young men because they're the number one people to join the military, to join terrorist organizations, to join, you know, different groups of people like that. And I think it's important that people become more aware of that.
I think that probably a lot of people are going to listen to your podcast and they're going to do their doctoral dissertations on it. And that'll be good. It certainly will to make the hopefully not make as many angry young men. I want to share one little quick story with you from Afghanistan. We had interpreters that we would use when we were in Afghanistan, and a lot of young men over there had learned how to speak English, native Afghanis, and we would hire them to interpret for us a lot of times on dangerous combat missions and other times in very benign situations and stuff. And when you work with people like that, you become friends with them as much as you can be, and you have those great conversations that you have with your friends. And I remember talking to him, and he was a young fella, and we were doing some pretty dicey missions. It was pretty, you know what I mean? There was a lot of bullets flying. It was pretty dangerous like that. And so I asked him one day, I was like going, so do you like doing this? And he was like, I like working with you guys. You guys are really good guys like that. And I was like, well, that's awesome. I go, you're a really good guy too. And I said, do we pay you enough money, for doing what it is that you do? And he goes, you do, but I don't get any of my money. All of my money goes to my mom and dad. And I was like, well, why does that happen? And he goes, well, culturally in Afghanistan, that's just the way it is. And I was like, so here's this young guy, essentially, he's risking his life and he's getting no monetary award for it and stuff like that. But what we were able to do was we were able to come up with some extra money to give him that his mom and dad did not know about. So he could have some money. And I asked him one day too, and I was like, so what are you going to do when you grow up? I was like, do you have a girlfriend? And he goes, I do have a girlfriend and I like her very much and she likes me. He goes, but sadly, we will not be able to get married. And I was like, well, why won't you be able to get married? And he said, well, in my culture, in order for me to get married, he goes, I have to be able to pay for the wedding. I have to be able to pay for the wedding clothes for both her family and my family and everything. And he goes, I don't make enough money to do that. So sadly, we will not be able to get married. And, so by him saying that, well, I'll tell you very quickly that I was able to talk to a fellow from Afghanistan that actually came over once we left Afghanistan, and he had acted as in the same capacity. And he came over and brought his family to America. And he said culturally things have changed some there. So it, potentially and hopefully, that would not be the situation, for this young man anymore. But back to what we were talking about, George, with the angry young men. Metaphorically, you and I, even though we're a lot of age difference and stuff like that, we live the American dream. And I'm just going to throw it out. It may not be the perfect American dream or whatever, but as a young dude in America, you go to school, you go to high school, maybe you play football, maybe you date a cheerleader, she's awesome and everything's great. And you get a college education and get a good job and get a house with a white picket fence and have a dog and a couple of kids. And it's awesome. That's what kind of rolls through our mind in the big scheme of things. And sadly, it's just not that way sometimes in other cultures with other things that are there. And then you have these other dudes that pipe up and they're going, yeah, you may not get that, but you can have this cool AK-47, and you can run around with it and be awesome like me, and sadly, some young folks, some young men who weren't so angry, become angry that way. And I just wanted to throw that out. Hopefully where everything works out for my little buddy in Afghanistan that's probably 35 years old now, but anyway, because that was a long time ago. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that little tidbit out.
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, that's a really awesome thing that you did for him. But secondly, when it comes down to angry young men, I think that the solution, because I feel like all people have a little bit of anger towards something, whether, I feel like that's kind of why people like watching movies like, with vigilantes in them, like, Batman or, I guess you could say Fight Club even, or all these movies where the main character is going against society and doing something morally gray, but, something where you can kind of understand what he's doing, or more extreme cases like The Punisher, right? Where, people see it and especially younger guys, they see it and they go, wow, that's really cool, and there's some aspect to them to where they're like, oh, if only I could be like him, if only I could do what he does. And they say that to themselves. And ultimately, that, for some people that builds up and they attempt to make it a reality, which, you know, or they get sucked into a philosophy, and unfortunately, a lot of those philosophies, like neo Nazis, for example, they get sucked into terrorism and violence and they do become legitimately bad people. But then there's others that, will join the military or, do legitimately good things with their life or become a UFC fighter or, something where they make something out of that anger. Right. But I think it really just comes down to whether or not they're guided correctly more than anything else. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, you hit on some important stuff there. There's no doubt about that. And circles back to one of the points that you made earlier. That you'd heard multiple times on there, besides leadership, and that was purpose. Is to have a purpose in what you're doing. And I think with the leadership part, when we see those folks' purpose, if the purpose looks skewed, if you have the ability to nudge them over to the right path or a more right path, then hopefully, that purpose has a dutiful back to it, that helps people and makes for the better, a good purpose.
That's the hope. I mean, we as a people, in my opinion, I think that people need to look out for each other more and they got to help each other out a little bit more here and there. It doesn't have to be anything super obvious or, in your face, like, oh, what can I do for you? It could just be very simple. You phone a friend you think is, maybe going through a rough time. You're like, hey, man, I really appreciate you. Something like that, and I've done that before and people will have, said to me, they're like, whoa, like, that really made my day. And it's just little things like that that I think that more people should do to each other, for each other, a little bit more often. Because at the end of the day, everybody's fighting a battle that you know nothing about, right? And I think that we have an obligation to help each other. You know, we're the only species that we got. We're the only people, if that makes any sense. We're the only Earth that we have, if that makes sense. Almost.
That's right. This it really doesn't matter who you are or what you do, and all of us will sit there and go, man, that Elon Musk, he's got it made in a shape. And it's like, yeah, you can say that, but I guarantee you, on this place, on this planet, and everything that we do, everybody has a challenging life. It doesn't matter who you are. When you look at it close enough, and you're 100% right, there's not a single person that gets up in the morning most of the time or always goes, you know what, I'm going to get up this morning, I'm going to really go screw some things up. Most of the time, everybody's doing the very best job that they can, and things probably just not going the way that they would like them to. And just like you said, if you can recognize that and just give somebody a break, a little bit of a break, it goes a long way. It's much appreciated.
Well, it's like the conversation that we were having earlier, where people hold celebrities, especially, to these colossally high standards that they themselves know that they could never reach, right? And they pick on the little things they do, right? So when you say with Elon Musk, for example, he's probably working, 16-hour days, and
Oh, yeah, 100%.
he's
You know,
working 16-hour days, managing 8 kids, like three ex-wives, and all this stuff. And then on top of that, he has the whole world looking at him going, I could do better, you know.
and it's so ridiculous. It's like, man, just give everybody a break, man. Everybody's probably doing the best job they can. It's,
Absolutely. This leads perfectly into one of my other questions of what's something that you think more people should be doing in the world right now?
I think just the one that pops right off in my mind is, and you've already said it, is just be kinder to one another. Give everybody a look and see what's up. Obviously support those that are around you. Your inner tribe, is going to get more support than those outer rings. But be kind to everybody and help where you can. I think that those, especially as I depart the military and move into this next act of life, though I may have been immature on a lot of that in my earlier days, that different person, which is the same person that we were talking about before, it's absolutely the case. I look back on different times and I go, man, I could have been a little bit nicer there. Would have been nice. And sometimes you're like, I wouldn't have done anything any differently, but maybe I could have worded it a little bit differently, or maybe tried to see it from their point of view. And by even just trying to see it that way, maybe I could have worded it a little bit better, so it didn't sting if it was something that had to sting or whatever. It's good stuff. There's no doubt about it. And I guess philosophically, in a way, if we could all get really good at that, we might not need any militaries anywhere. I think we're a ways away from that, but you know, there's hope for us. There's hope for us for sure. There's not a doubt in my mind.
Yeah, that's a beautiful world to live in where we don't have a need for militaries. That would be a great idea. But, there's nothing new under the sun. People will never change ultimately where there's, you know,
It just takes,
humans, I think.
it takes a while, and oftentimes that while is going to be after you and I both are gone, sadly. But just chipping away at it, and do what you can along the way, and live a purposeful life. And it's all good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the way I see it, I'm a little bit of a pessimist, and the way that I see it is, as long as there's humans, there's going to be a market for war, and
Yep,
it's I
I think you're right. I think you're right, and I laugh too. When um, you know, I love all the UFO stuff. You know what I mean? I love watching it and all the different parts of it and stuff like that. But aside from that being a totally different conversation, if I were one of those guys, right, and I was looking down at us, I'd be like going, bro, I don't know what's up, but we might want to give them another 100,000 years or 200,000 years. I don't know what's up. Or maybe let another asteroid hit them guys, because I tell you what, they cannot get along. It's like, for all the good folks that we have on the planet and all the good stuff that we do, man, when you look at it like that, it's just like, come on, man, what are you guys doing? It's like, get it together.
I mean, just look at the past 6,000 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just say, it, let's just say humans have existed for 250,000 years, really. And then only the last 4,000 or 6,000 or whatever have been truly of real significance. And in all those thousands of years, same types of personalities have existed, same types of people have existed, warlords, same types of people as now. The ones that want to change the world for the better, the innovators, the warlords, the soldiers, the warriors, etc. It's ultimately it's always going to be the same. It's always going to be that same archetype of personality somewhere. Where there's the ability to get power, there's always going to be those that want it. I think Frank Roosevelt had a really interesting quote. I read it recently, which is that war is young men dying and old men talking.
Yes, that's a lot. That's very true. So much truth for that. It really is. Yep. To distill that all that down, it's really ego. It's ego, ego, ego all day long. That's the catalyst behind the greed, the hunger for power, all of that stuff. And until we can figure out a way to get all of that under control.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really comes down to just a matter of, human nature, really, and whether or not enough people have enough self control to say to themselves, you know what, I don't need, you know, to necessarily, I don't, we don't need any more land. We don't need any more of this. I don't want to see people die. That's really what the mindset of all world leaders should be is, I don't want to see people die. That, whether it be your own people or any other group of people. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And I don't think there ever will be the point where it is, sadly. Maybe one day, maybe. I hope I'm wrong, but the way that things have been going for the past 6,000 years, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I absolutely hope you're wrong, but I hope you're wrong, George, but only on that one thing. That's the only thing. Because I like you a lot and I like where you're going, and you got a good head on your shoulders and you think a lot. And I like that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Let me think. Oh yeah. Light question.
Mhm.
What do you like doing in your free time?
Oh man, I like doing a lot of stuff. I've always I think in some ways I'm the bane of my wife's existence with my thinking of new things to do. And um, I think that's the kid in me. But anyway, things that I do a lot. I go to hot yoga a lot. I like yoga. When you get as old as me, it's good to stretch, and that's a really great environment to stretch in. And it also allows controlled breathing and meditation, which is very, very important and awesome for me right now. It wasn't so much for me when I was your age, but it is now. I play guitar. I have four children, three daughters, 24, 22, 21. that I love hanging out with. And my son is 16, and I like hanging out with him and playing frisbee golf, which is kind of fun. I wouldn't have thought it would be, but it really is fun. We used to play regular golf, and then we lost so many balls, and he couldn't hit it very far back when he was short. And we got to the point one day, he like looked at me, he goes, "Dad, we're not having any fun out here like that." And I was like, "Roger that, we're not. Let's go do something else." So anyway, we grabbed a bunch of frisbee discs and started playing frisbee golf. So I do that too. And over the years, I have just had a lot of different stuff that I do along the way. And, water sports and all of that stuff. Jack of all trades, master of some, if you will, that kind of thing. But I like
Yeah.
that.
A lot of guys, my dad especially, and I mentioned this multiple times, but he loves playing golf. I remember I was talking to Steven about this, where I was talking to him about, what he does either in his free time now, just now that he's retired, and he was saying, "I love golf." He's like, "I love playing golf. I love doing golf." And I'm like, "You should talk to my dad then, because my dad also loves playing golf."
Ah, yeah, Steve was always very talented in all of those things. I remember like back in the 80s, man, he was really great at racquetball too. He's a great all around athlete. There's no doubt about it. Golf is fun. I can have a good time playing golf, but just not weekly. every now every now and then. But walking the courses are beautiful. There is no doubt. It's a it's a great sport. It's a beautiful sport. There's no doubt about that.
It helps people to bond too. I feel like a lot of guys, they like playing golf. I have never gotten into it. I one day probably will, because everybody that I know eventually does. Personally, I have yet to, but I have a feeling that's going to change at some point. One day I'm going to wake up and I'm going to try, and I'm going to like it. But um in terms of advice that you would want to give to current military personnel, what advice would that be?
I I think that the advice that I would give is I love the idea of the U.S. military and its in the opportunity that it provides. I know for me, I was a I was just a young guy with crappy high school grades from the middle of Alabama somewhere, and I was able to go into this organization, and I was surrounded by other people that like me and other people that had been like me. So they cultivated you, and they would watch you, and they would let you rise. So I love the military because it is absolutely unlimited in what you can do. You can go in as an E1, the bottom of the barrel, and go all the way to the top and run the entire military. You can even be the president of the United States. And it's not a doubt. And all of that is just based off of your work ethic and how you do your job. And that, I'm telling you, they will give you a college education. They will promote you. They will continue to promote you. They'll make you an officer. They'll put you in charge of people. They will do all of that stuff, and they'll give you purpose, and they'll pay you the whole time, and they will, give you a great retirement. If they could change one thing, and I know they're not going to, it would absolutely be to do it back to the old retirement program, which I like better, which I thought was fair. 50% retirement at 20 years of service. Um, the one that they have now, actually, a fellow that I know was one of the guys that helped formulate it. But if you stay in for a long time, it really gives you, it gives you a good little nest egg there of getting your life off the ground. The fraternity, which is the United States military, they watch out for each other, and you kind of know what you're getting. Like if you hire a serviceman, you can talk to them, find out what their career, and that with a little bit of listening to them and what they've done, that they've been disciplined about what they've done. They've been trained effectively, and they probably can be trained to do whatever within your organization is appropriate for them. So I just think it's a great place to start. And And I like I said, just being a guy from the middle of Alabama somewhere, and there's that a lot of us come that way, and then a lot of us choose the military very deliberately, and they knew that they were going to do that from the time that they couldn't walk, and it's just a good solid it's a good solid way to go. And I'd tell everybody in the military, just give it your very best and do your very best, and you'll be rewarded for it. And if you don't like the job that you're in, change it, because you can. And it's the thing, if you don't like the Army, you can go to the Navy. If you want to go to the Marine Corps, you can. They're in the military. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the military, they've got these thing called waivers, right? And so whenever you don't meet a certain criteria, there's a waiver. Like, say my eyesight is not quite good enough, or whatever. Somebody can approve a waiver, which will allow you to do that. Everything in the military is waiverable. Go into it with that attitude. Now, granted, if you've got like terrible, terrible vision, you're probably not going to be able to be a Navy SEAL. Some things are just there's realistic expectations within that. Like when I first came in the military, I was like, well, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL, and then I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy and then become a fighter pilot. And then I'm going to fly an SR-71 Blackbird. And then from there, I'm going to be an astronaut. And when I get to be an astronaut, I'm going to be a senator. And then I'm going to be the president of the United States. That was my long-term plan. I actually, one of my old bosses sent me the paperwork that I filled out back when I was like 20 years old. And it actually says that on it, And, life does different things, and it's all good. But, there's nothing wrong with setting those short, medium, and long-range goals. And they're going to change. Like by the time I was old enough to fly an SR-71 Blackbird, they were no longer flying them. So it was no big deal. And unfortunately, I just wasn't quite smart enough to be an astronaut. But that's okay, because, you find your path, and then you just rock and roll with what you got, and everything will turn out okay.
I mean, if you still want to run for president, I'd be open to voting for you the next election.
I appreciate that, but yeah, that's a. I think I've got some friends that want to be the president. Maybe I'll support them and see how it works out for them, because that seems like a pretty tall order. And when you were talking about before, with celebrities and stuff like that, I just think it would be kind of bummer to be in a position where some people just hate you for no reason sometimes. Obviously, granted, now, I'm not saying that there's not, but, when people just can love you or hate you for no reason at all, that's, I think that's a level of celebridom, if that's a word, that I don't know that I'm looking to achieve. I appreciate your vote of confidence there, though, George.
I mean, you'd be better than a lot of the guys that are running right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, George, not saying much, but thank you anyway.
Yeah, we got to get some better leaders. That's what everybody's.
Yeah,
that's what.
Seriously, we did.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say who's better, who's good, or who's bad, but I'm just gonna say I think that we need some overall better leadership.
Leadership's a good. There's no doubt about it. I like some quality leadership. I like. There's a thing in our Navy SEAL thing. It's called ready to lead, ready to follow, never quit, and that's what we need. We need some good leaders that are good followers, and good followers that are good leaders. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, the best form of servitude is leadership. That's what I like to say, because ultimately, you're as a leader, your goal is to guide people. I think that's a very big important part of being a leader, is knowing how to guide people, not how to necessarily control micromanage every little thing that a person's doing. You pick, let's just say you're the president. I think that there's a very important part to just selecting people that know what they're doing, and just working with those people from there, and trusting what they're saying. And, because the president doesn't know everything. As much as we like to say the president, I blame the president for this. The president doesn't control as much as you think he does, right? Senators, the governor, whatever, they don't control as much as you think they do, right?
That's right. An organization gets, the harder that it is for a singular person up at the top to manipulate it, you know, and I don't mean manipulate in a bad way. I mean to make adjustments, I guess is a better word, better phrase for me to say. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, with leadership too, it's about bringing out the best in the folks that work for you, you know, and giving them purpose. And I don't mean necessarily always the best to make more money or to whatever, but you know, everybody's unique, you know, and you can absolutely work and help a person to be able to achieve things that they never even knew that they'd be able to achieve, which ultimately benefits the organization, whatever that organization may be. And and I found too, during my times as a leader, that if you lead your folks well all the time and you provide them with all the information that you can and you can answer their questions when you can, in those moments that you don't have the ability to because you're having to make some serious decisions, they'll always give you the benefit of the doubt, and because they trust you, because you built that trust over the over all of the non-important times. You were there, you built that trust, you know, and you'll have their support and you'll have their family support, and you can get it and you can get the job done. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I think that there's not enough people in general of any political stature that are willing to effectively, carry out the job as a public servant. That's the way I see it. In general, in the world, and that's not just a nowadays thing, but it's throughout history. We see it where the best types of leaders and the ones that we look up to the most, whether it be Martin Luther King or Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, right? We see a lot of those leaders as good because they took the job as a form of a public servant instead of you know using the office for their own benefit and their own gain. And that's a conversation I've had with Jim DiOrio, former head of the New Jersey FBI. I've had with all the different people that I've had on. It's that we got to have better leaders, and ultimately that's up to us too. We have to pick people that are better too, that truly represent what we want, and aren't necessarily there to make a quick buck or benefit themselves. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. A life of service, you know, and all of those people that you formerly mentioned, you know, they all they all aspired to a life of service, and they did it humbly, and they kept their egos in check. I'm sure at some points in their lives their egos were not in check, but they learned from that and they became wise from that. And that wisdom allowed them all to become great leaders in their own right, you know. And I'm with you. I wish we absolutely had more of them around with us. And moreover than that, if they are in fact are around with us now, that we're wise enough to realize that that's what they are, you know, while we've got them, and not, you know, not historically, you know, to recognize a wise leader when we see one, and then give them the benefit of the doubt. Back to the earlier part of our conversation where we were talking about how critical we are of celebrities and different things, and we jump on somebody's back for something stupid or something like that. When we have those leaders emerge, that we're actually wise enough to realize that they're that way, and to give them that benefit of the doubt to and take their leadership, if you will, accept
Right.
their leadership.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, if we're looking at the leaders as representative of, I don't think it's fair to constantly criticize every little thing they do sometimes either. Sometimes, yes, I understand the criticism, but constantly saying to them, I think that guy should be doing this. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. Number one, it's just a higher form of gossip. It's just a glorified form of gossip. That's number one part of the problem, right? People don't see it as such because they see it as, oh, well, that person's in the media. I don't know him. And they almost kind of don't see the person as real, which isn't really fair because that person absolutely is real.
Mm-hmm.
And people tend to forget that. Like, this one kid I had on the show, he's 16, from South Africa. He has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, for doing like wheelies and tricks on his motorcycle. And he's like, it's such a, and he barely shows his face, but people will still recognize him. And he's like, it's such a strange thing when, you get people coming up to you in the street or at the grocery store, like, oh, are you this guy on Instagram? And he's like, relax, I'm just a guy like you. And in some way, you can kind of tell he feel like he doesn't deserve it, you know, not like in a bad way, not, but it's almost like why does this person think that I'm so much higher than them? Like, why is that person putting me in a pedestal? It's a very strange feeling, especially as like such a young kid. And I even said, I'm like, it's strange that he's humble about it, because a lot of kids, unfortunately, would let that kind of fame get to their head. But I digress. I mean, I, I just think that, like we're saying, just humble public servants would be, and also a little bit more of a relaxed public.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Oh, the other thing that popped in my mind too, George, as we were talking about that, was when you are that leader, when you get up that food chain and you are that leader, just remember that you surround yourself with excellent people. Surrounding yourself with excellent people is incredible. That's what you got to do. And a lot of the great leaders that you look at, you look at who they surrounded themselves with, and then if you do a little further math on that, look at where those people went. Because I tell you what, one of the things that I learned in doing the medicine that I did in being a medic, it is important to know what you know, but it's more important to know where to go look to find that information or who to ask. And there's not a better thing to do within an organization is surround yourself with people that are smarter than you if possible. And that'll always serve you well, and that's a good thing. And too, if you look into like we were talking politics a little bit there, and stuff, when you look at the individuals, you'll always look at the president or the person that's running for president or this, the governor or whatever like that. Do a little research on the people that are underneath them, because I know from being a boss that my organization runs people that are underneath me. I get to stand up at the podium and talk and stuff like that. But if the organization is running great, it's those people that are underneath me are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting day in and day out and stuff like that. So a lot of times when you look at great presidencies and stuff like that, look at the folks that were underneath them too, and where they went and what they did. That'll add depth to it. And also it's just a good rule of thumb that, when you find yourself in those positions, you've molded those people all along the thing. You've probably, some of those people you've molded up their career. And if you get lucky enough that you have what we call repeat offenders, and the offenders part is a joke, but it's, you'll hear somebody say, God, I worked with him like 5 years ago, man. If I ever get in this job, I'm going to call that guy up and see if I can't get him over here to work. Cause you already know their work ethic and everything they do. And, I'm sure in politics and and definitely in the military, absolutely in the SEAL teams and all the other organizations that I've ever been a part of, you cultivate those groups and those people and you work with them over and over again, and they go up the food chain and you go up the food chain, and, you're just able to populate, those positions, those important positions underneath you, which enables your organization to run with the, for it to run effectively and just make it a great organization. And I think you'll find that across the board, it's good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a very extremely important point that, you know, the CEO of a company, for example, will a lot of people always jump to blame him for any little thing that happens. And the board of directors even will always be like, oh, we got to fire this guy, or, oh, I think we should get rid of this guy because he's the head of this, and because that company is doing badly. When in reality, they probably didn't even make that decision or might not have even been aware of a bad decision that company made in some cases, right? Or maybe if they were, they thought it was going to be quick, a quick decision, and it ultimately ended badly. Stuff happens. I mean, it's not, nobody's perfect, but
And yeah, different organizations, different cultures, they have different norms, with regard to that. One that I'll bring to your attention right now, I don't know if you knew, the Navy, the United States Navy is very unique in that. And the commanding officer harkened back to the olden days of ship and sail, the term of master and commander, the ship, the captain of the ship. And that still holds very true. And that's why a lot of times you see Navy the commanding officers of ships relieved so quickly is the cultural norm, which I believe is a good one. It's a very harsh one, but I believe it's a good one, that you are absolutely responsible at all times in everything. There is nothing that you can delegate as the commanding officer to anybody else. You're ultimately responsible and you'll ultimately be held accountable. But you'll understand too that within the United States military and the United States Navy, it's that way for a reason, culturally, because back in the olden days, you may go sail that ship to the other side of the world, and you're the president of that ship. What you say goes, and that's one of the ones that it's always held true. And I'm not saying the other armed forces don't have their own variances and their own cultures too, but that's one that holds very true even to this day. And successfully negotiating one, two, three, or more commanding officer tours, you're probably looking at a very highly competent individual there. That they didn't get lucky. You know what I'm saying? They built good teams, and they're good teams. They're good team. They carried their good teams, and they're good. But more importantly, their good teams carried them. And the excellence spoke for itself, which was just a byproduct of that team.
Absolutely, man. I think that's a good place for us to end off. Is there any last words you'd like to say to the audience before I, stop the recording and talk a little bit after the show?
No, the only thing I've got, George, is it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You're amazing in what you do. I'm glad you're doing it. If you ever need anybody, if I can help you get any other people to talk to, I'd absolutely do that. You're an extraordinary young man, and it has been my pleasure to speak with you here today, and I thank you.
I appreciate that, man, and I appreciate it a lot. And just want to let you know you're welcome back here anytime. Just you know where to get me. All right. I'll stop the recording and talk a little bit after the show. All right. Sounds good. All
Gotcha.
right.